She knocked on a billionaire's mansion door, just asking for bread. But when he saw her face, he dropped to his knees in shock. In the forgotten outskirts of Maple Creek, a little girl named Edlin lived in a rusted trailer that groaned under the weight of snow. The walls were paper thin, the windows patched with plastic, and the cold seemed to seep into her bones no matter how many blankets she wrapped around herself. She was only 10, but life had forced her to grow old in silence. Her mother, Lorene, worked 3 grueling jobs, cleaning motels, stocking shelves at night, and washing dishes at a diner, just to keep the lights flickering and a few cans of beans in the cupboard. But tonight, even that wasn't enough. The power had gone out again. The cupboards were bare. Her mother hadn't come home, and Edlin's stomach was growling so loudly it felt like it was echoing through the whole trailer. She tried to ignore it, curled in a ball on the torn-up couch, but the hunger became unbearable. Her fingers were numb, her lips chapped. It was then she remembered the stories. About the mansion deep in the pine woods on the hill, about the billionaire who lived alone, hidden from the world. The adults in town called him strange, cursed even. But Edlin didn't believe in curses. She believed in hunger. She pulled on her tattered blue coat, the sleeves far too short, and stepped into the snow barefoot. Her only pair of shoes had torn beyond repair weeks ago. The snow was thick, biting her feet like needles, but she clenched her jaw and walked. The mansion was nearly a mile away, hidden behind towering trees and a wrought iron gate. She'd never dared go near it before, but tonight she had no choice. Each step was slower than the last. Her toes were stiff, her legs ached. But finally, the outline of the mansion rose like a ghost in the moonlight. Huge, dark windows, roof lines like a castle, iron gates taller than any man. Edlin hesitated for a moment, heart pounding. Then, she saw a small button by the gate. She reached up and pressed it. A soft chime echoed beyond the gate, then silence. She waited and waited. The cold bit deeper into her skin. She was about to give up, turn back, when the gate creaked open. With shaking legs, she stepped through. The path to the mansion door was lined with stone lanterns and statues that seemed to watch her with cold eyes. At the front door, she raised her fist and knocked. A moment passed, then footsteps. Slow, heavy. The massive oak door opened with a groan, and standing there, tall and severe, was a man in his early 60s. Thick gray hair, a trimmed beard, and eyes like winter steel. He wore a velvet robe and looked as though he hadn't smiled in a decade. "Now, what do you want?" he asked, voice low and tired. Edlin looked up at him with wide, shivering eyes. Her lips cracked as she whispered, "Please, sir, do you have any bread?" The man stared at her. His breath caught, his eyes widened. For one long, haunted moment, he didn't speak. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "It can't be." The moment Edlin's words left her lips, the tall man at the door stood frozen. A gust of cold wind swept in from behind her, rustling the hem of her too-short coat and making her tremble even harder. But the man didn't seem to notice the wind. His sharp, piercing eyes were locked on her face, unblinking. He looked like he had seen a ghost, like time itself had cracked open and spilled a memory right in front of him. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then, almost robotically, the man stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come inside," he said quietly. Edlin hesitated. Everything about the house looked like something out of a storybook she was never rich enough to own. Dark, polished wood floors, chandeliers that looked like upside-down gardens of glass, paintings of men in old-fashioned suits. But her hunger outweighed her fear. She stepped over the threshold and into warmth. Instantly, her skin prickled from the temperature change. A roaring fireplace lit the main hall, and its heat rolled toward her like a soft wave. Her bare feet left wet prints on the glossy floor. She looked down, embarrassed, but the man said nothing. He was still staring at her, his expression unreadable, eyes wide and tense. "What's your name?" he asked, still standing stiffly as though afraid to move too quickly. "Edlin. Edlin Miles," she replied, voice still trembling. The name seemed to hit him like a slap. He staggered slightly and caught the edge of the table beside him. "Miles," he repeated, voice almost hoarse. "And your mother?" "Lorene Miles," she answered softly. "She works a lot. I think she's still at the grocery store, or the diner. I don't know." The man's hands curled slowly into fists, but not in anger, in disbelief. He turned away for a moment, pacing in a tight circle, one hand pressed against his temple. Lorene, Lorene, he muttered under his breath. Edlin took a cautious step back. Did I do something wrong? At that, he spun around. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. No, you didn't. You look like someone I once knew. She tilted her head. Do I? You remind me of someone I lost. There was pain in his voice. Deep, old pain. Edlin didn't know what to say. She clutched her coat tighter and looked around nervously, not knowing where to stand or sit. Without another word, the man moved toward a wall-mounted intercom panel near the entrance. He pressed a button. Vivian, please prepare something warm in the kitchen. A full meal, soup, bread, whatever is fresh. And have a pair of slippers brought to the front hall. A gentle voice crackled back through the speaker. Right away, sir. He turned back to Edlin and softened his voice. You must be cold. Come, there's a bench near the fire. He led her a few feet toward the main hall where the fireplace burned beneath a carved marble mantel. She sat carefully, unsure if she was allowed to. The bench was cushioned, far softer than anything she had at home. Her toes slowly started to thaw, and the warmth made her eyes sting with tears she didn't want to cry. What were you doing out there in this cold, child? He asked, watching her carefully. We ran out of food. I didn't want to steal. I just thought maybe someone here could spare a slice of bread, she said, cheeks burning with shame. The man didn't respond at first. He lowered himself into a chair across from her, still studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have come. No, he said firmly. You did the right thing. Just then a maid appeared carrying a tray, steam curling from a bowl of creamy soup, a plate of buttered bread, and a mug of hot cocoa. Edlin's eyes widened as the tray was placed before her. She looked to the man for permission. He gave a small nod. She picked up a spoon, her hands shaking, and took a cautious sip. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. The warmth spread through her chest like sunlight. Then a bite of bread, soft, warm, buttery. As she ate, the man watched her in silence. His mind raced with questions, memories, and a name he hadn't said aloud in years. Rosalind, his daughter who had died in a fire. His wife's sister, Lorene, the girl before him. Could it really be? And if it was, why had she come now? The silence in the grand sitting room was thick, broken only by the soft clink of Edlin's spoon against the porcelain bowl. She ate slowly at first as if afraid the food might disappear if she hurried, but soon hunger overtook caution. The rich soup warmed her throat and chest, and the buttered bread melted in her mouth. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the cold, the trailer, the missing mother, and simply felt full for the first time in days. The man still hadn't introduced himself. He sat across from her in his velvet robe, elbows resting on the armrests, fingers laced in front of his face. His gaze never left her. Not out of menace, but something deeper, like watching a dream try to come to life. At last, she spoke. Thank you, sir. For the food, I didn't know where else to go. His voice came low, rough with emotion. You said your mother's name is Lorene Miles? Edlin nodded, wiping her mouth carefully with the cloth napkin. Did she ever mention a woman named Lydia? He asked, eyes narrowing just slightly. Edlin blinked. Lydia? No, I don't think so. He nodded slowly as if confirming a theory he didn't want to believe. Then he leaned forward, the weight of years in his movement. My name is Monteval Harlow, he said. And a long time ago, I had a daughter. Edlin tilted her head. You did? Yes. Her name was Rosalind. She was only a baby. My wife, Lydia, and I lived in this house then. One night, there was a fire. Everything burned. The nursery, the east wing, everything. Lydia was never found. Neither was Rosalind. The police assumed they both perished. He paused, rubbing his temple. His breath trembled as he continued. But Lydia had a sister. Her name was Lorene, and she vanished the same night. Edlin's heart skipped. She sat still, her fingers clenched around her mug of cocoa. Monteval stared at her with a mixture of hope and pain. Edlin, how old are you? 10, she whispered. He exhaled shakily. That night, the fire happened 10 years ago. She said nothing, but something stirred inside her. An uncomfortable knot she couldn't name. He stood slowly, walked to an old drawer in the corner of the room, and retrieved a thin, dusty photo album. Flipping it open, he returned and handed it to her. Look! The page showed a woman smiling beside a small child in a garden. The child was a baby, with soft, dark hair and a crooked little smile. Edlin's breath caught. She looks like me. She is you, Montevill said, voice cracking. Edlin stared at the photo. The woman, her face was familiar. Not exactly like her mother's, but similar. Softer. Lighter hair. The baby's features were unmistakable. That same small cleft in the chin. The same curve of the eyebrows. It was like looking into a mirror across time. I don't understand, she said quietly. My mom always said my dad died before I was born. She never told me anything about a fire. Monteville's face hardened, not with anger, but with the kind of grief that resurfaces old wounds. She didn't just leave, he said, almost to himself. She took my daughter and ran. The words echoed in the air. Edlin looked down at the photo again, her heart pounding. I don't know why, she said quickly. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought it was safer. I don't blame you, he interrupted gently. You're just a child. But she made choices, and those choices kept you hidden from me for 10 years. A long silence followed. Then Montevill took a breath and softened his voice. You should stay here tonight. The roads are dangerous, and you're not going back to a cold trailer in bare feet. Edlin hesitated. But my mom, she'll be worried. She'll be contacted. I promise. He walked to the side table and picked up a phone. His fingers dialed with practiced precision. After a moment, someone answered. Yes, I need to find a woman named Lorene Miles. She may be working at East Pine Diner or the corner grocery. Tell her that Montevill Harlow has found Edlin, and she needs to come here. Now. He hung up, then turned back to Edlin, who was still clutching the album in her lap. Sleep in a warm bed tonight, he said gently. You're safe now. And though the truth swirled in her mind like a storm of shadows and names she didn't understand, Edlin somehow believed him. The following morning, the sun barely peeked through the frost-touched windows of the mansion as Montevill stood in his study, pacing. He had barely slept. Every hour of the night had been spent flipping through old photo albums, medical records, police reports, and the one surviving image of his infant daughter, Rosalind. The resemblance to Edlin wasn't just striking, it was undeniable. He kept wondering how he could have been so blind for 10 years. The night of the fire had shattered his life. Lydia gone, Rosalind gone, and Lorene, her sister, disappeared without a trace. Until now, a knock on the study door jolted him from his thoughts. Sir, said Vivian, the longtime housekeeper, her voice low, there's a woman at the gate. She says her name is Lorene Miles. She's frantic. Montevill straightened instantly. Let her in. Bring her to the parlor. I'll be there. Moments later, he stepped into the warm, sunlit parlor where Edlin had just finished breakfast. A plate of eggs and toast cleared down to crumbs. She looked up as her mother entered the room. Lorene's face was pale, her uniform still on, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Her coat was unbuttoned, her hair unbrushed, and her boots dusted with salt and snow. Edlin! She cried, rushing forward and falling to her knees in front of her daughter, hugging her tightly. Oh, my baby, thank God you're okay. Edlin clung to her mother. I came here for bread. He gave me food, and he showed me a picture. Mommy, he thinks I'm his daughter. Lorene froze. Montevill watched her carefully. His voice was calm but edged with steel. Why did you lie to her, Lorene? She slowly rose to her feet, keeping one hand on Edlin's shoulder as if trying to shield her. I didn't lie, I couldn't tell her. I didn't know how. You let me believe my daughter died in that fire, he said, his voice lower now, like distant thunder. You disappeared the same night. With her? Lorene's lips trembled. Her eyes welled with tears. She was no longer the quiet, tired cleaner from the grocery store. She was a woman cornered by 10 years of guilt. You don't understand what it was like that night, she said, her voice shaking. The fire spread so fast. Lydia was trapped in the nursery. I got the baby out. I thought you were dead. The house was going up like a matchbox. I tried to find you, but the roof collapsed. And when I realized the police thought everyone was gone, I panicked. You could have come back, Montevill said sharply. I was 23, broke, alone, and terrified, she snapped. I didn't know what you'd do. Lydia was gone, and I had her child in my arms. I didn't want to give her to strangers. I didn't want her to grow up in some cold foster system or worse, become a pawn in some legal nightmare. So I ran. I raised her. I loved her. Maybe not in a mansion, but she was safe. Monteville's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The air between them crackled with a decade's worth of grief and rage. "She's my daughter," he finally said. "She's my niece," Lorene replied, eyes flashing. "And I've kept her alive." Silence. Long and brutal. Then Edlin, who'd been quietly watching them both, stepped forward. Her small voice was the only thing that could pierce the tension. "I don't care about mansions or last names," she said. "I just want to know why no one ever told me who I was." Monteville's eyes softened. Lorene broke. Her voice cracked as she knelt beside her daughter again. "Because I didn't want you to be a sad story. I wanted you to have a fresh start." "And what about him?" Edlin looked up at Monteville. "He thought I was dead." Lorene wiped her tears and turned to him. "I won't fight you. If you want to take me to court, fine. But don't punish her for what I did." Monteville looked at both of them, two figures from a life he thought had vanished in ash. "I don't want revenge," he said slowly. "I want the truth, and I want my daughter to know where she came from." He turned to Edlin. "I lost you once. I won't do it again." And though Lorene said nothing more, her silence was no longer defiance. It was surrender, a quiet, heavy surrender to the past, finally catching up. For the next several days, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. A strange, delicate truce had settled over the household. Monteville allowed Lorene and Edlin to stay, at least temporarily, while decisions were being made. But nothing about the arrangement was simple. Lorene spent most of her time in the guest wing, avoiding eye contact with Monteville unless absolutely necessary. She moved like a shadow through the halls, polite but distant, her every step weighed down by guilt. Meanwhile, Edlin began to blossom. With each passing day, the child who once asked for bread with shaking hands stood a little taller, smiled a little more, and began to explore the grand house that was, by blood, rightfully hers. She found comfort in the house's stillness, its libraries, its winding staircases, the garden buried beneath snow. The staff adored her. Vivian, the housekeeper, even began teaching her how to bake. Monteville, awkward at first, began joining her for breakfast. He would ask about her schoolwork, her favorite books, her dreams. At first, his questions were stiff, rehearsed, like a man reading from a forgotten script. But Edlin answered with curiosity and warmth. Slowly, the ice between them began to thaw. One afternoon, she wandered into Monteville's private study, where he was seated by the fire with an old leather-bound journal. She knocked gently on the open door. "Can I come in?" He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Of course." She entered, quietly closing the door behind her. "You always look like you're reading something sad." He smiled faintly. "This one is. It's your mother's handwriting." He paused, correcting himself. "Lydia's." Edlin came closer, peeking at the delicate looping letters. "What does it say?" He flipped to a bookmarked page. "It's a letter she never sent. She wrote it 2 days before the fire. It was meant for Rosalind. You." Edlin froze. Monteville's voice was calm, almost reverent. "She wrote about how much she loved you, how scared she was that something would happen to the family. She wrote that if anything ever did happen, she hoped you'd grow up kind, brave, free." Tears prickled at Edlin's eyes. "I wish I could remember her." "You were only a baby," Monteville said softly. "But you have her eyes, and her spirit." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Then Monteville turned toward her, his tone more serious. "Edlin, I'm going to make a request, and I want you to be honest with me." She nodded, eyes wide. "Would you want to stay here? Live here? Not just visit? Make this your home?" Edlin hesitated. "And would my mom stay too?" Monteville's jaw tightened slightly. "That's complicated." "She's all I've ever had," Edlin said quietly. "Even when it was bad. Even when we were cold and hungry. She never left me." Monteville leaned back, exhaling slowly. "She made a choice. One that hurt a lot of people." "I know," Edlin said. "But maybe she was hurting too." He looked at her. There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty, raw and gentle. That night, he found Lorene sitting alone in the garden room, staring through the frosted glass at the snow-covered maze beyond. He entered without knocking. "She wants you here," he said. Lorene turned, eyes tired. She said that? She did. And I won't take her from you. I won't be the monster you feared I would become. Lorene nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. Monteville sat across from her, and for a long time they said nothing. Just two people who had loved the same woman, who had both lost and held on in their own desperate ways. She's growing attached to you, Lorene finally said. I'm growing attached to her, Monteville replied. For the first time in years, there was no blame in his voice, only truth. And as the snow outside gently fell, a fragile hope began to form. Like the first green sprout beneath winter frost, a new beginning might be possible, but only if they could learn to forgive. The winter days melted slowly into early spring, and the mansion, once a museum of silence and grief, began to breathe again. Warm light spilled through the tall windows, and the echoing halls that had known only footsteps of solitude now rang with laughter, music, and the patter of small feet. Edlin's presence transformed the estate in quiet, miraculous ways. She had taken to riding the old pony that once belonged to her mother Lydia, with the stable-keeper's help. She spent hours in the library, reading everything from fairy tales to science books. In the evenings, she helped Vivian prepare dinner, often sneaking extra cookies to the gardener or the maids. Monteville watched all of this unfold with wonder, as if discovering life again through her eyes. Yet despite the warmth growing between them, the air remained heavy with unspoken questions. Edlin was thriving, but she was still caught between two worlds. Her love for Lorene hadn't faded, nor had her trust in Monteville. But as the adults carefully danced around their shared past, Edlin began to feel the burden of secrets not meant for a child. One rainy afternoon, she wandered into the old music room at the far end of the house. The door creaked as she entered, revealing a grand piano covered in a white sheet. She hesitated, then pulled it off, revealing polished wood and ivory keys. She sat at the bench, uncertain, and pressed a few notes. They rang through the room like old voices waking up. Behind her, Monteville's voice surprised her. Your mother played that every morning. Edlin turned. He stood in the doorway, watching with a quiet smile. She wrote a lullaby for you. She played it on this piano the night before the fire. Edlin's fingers paused over the keys. Do you remember it? He stepped closer, took a seat beside her, and placed his hands gently on the keys. For a moment he sat in silence, his eyes closed, remembering. Then, slowly, softly, he began to play. A simple melody. Tender, sad, full of love. Edlin watched his hands move, then slowly joined in with one finger, finding the high notes, mimicking what she heard. Together they recreated a song from a life that had once seemed lost. When they finished, neither spoke for several seconds. Now, that's beautiful, she whispered. It's yours, Monteville said. Your mother wrote it for you. She looked at him, then down at her lap. Do you think she would be mad at my mom for raising me? Monteville was quiet. Then he said gently, I think Lydia would be thankful you survived. And I think she would want peace, not blame. Later that evening, Edlin found Lorene in the guest room folding laundry. She sat on the edge of the bed and asked, Did you ever play piano? Lorene smiled faintly. Your mom did. I never had the patience. She wrote me a song. Lorene stopped folding, her fingers still. She did. Monteville remembered it. We played it together. Lorene looked down. I miss her every day. Edlin reached out, took her hand. He doesn't hate you. Lorene's voice was quiet. I still hate myself sometimes. Don't, Edlin said simply. You kept me alive. That night, something shifted. Not just in Edlin, but between the adults, too. At dinner, for the first time, Lorene and Monteville sat across from each other and shared a conversation about more than the past. They spoke of Edlin's reading habits, of how quickly she was learning piano, of how she cried during the end of Charlotte's Web. Monteville even chuckled softly when Lorene teased him about the dust on his wine cellar. It was a fragile harmony, but it was real. Edlin, sitting between them, felt it like sunlight through cracked windows. Not perfect, not whole, but warmer than anything she had ever known. Spring had fully arrived, and the estate grounds were beginning to bloom. The once lifeless garden behind the mansion now whispered with new colors. Tulips stretching, crocuses trembling in the breeze, and cherry blossoms shedding petals like gentle snow. Edlin loved to wander the garden paths after her lessons, her fingers grazing the hedges, her eyes lifted to the sky. Monteville often watched her from his study window. He had once poured his fortune into investments, stocks, acquisitions. But now, he found himself pouring energy into something far more delicate, learning to be a father. Each evening, he and Edlin played a song together in the music room. Sometimes she taught him silly children's tunes, and sometimes he guided her through classical pieces. On weekends, they'd bake pies with Vivian or feed carrots to the horses in the stable. The staff had begun to smile more. Laughter had returned to the halls. Even the paintings on the walls, Lydia's favorite art, seemed less somber under the golden light of returning life. But one evening, as twilight painted the mansion in hues of lavender and gold, Edlin stepped into the library and found Monteville and Lorene sitting on opposite sides of a long table. They weren't arguing, but their faces were serious. A pile of documents sat between them. She hovered in the doorway until Monteville noticed. "Come in, sweetheart," he said softly. Edlin stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" Lorene motioned to the papers. "Something important. About you." Monteville stood and came around the table, kneeling so he could look her in the eyes. "We want to ask you something, but it's okay if you need time to think." Edlin's heart began to thump. What is it?" "I'd like to adopt you legally," he said gently. "To make it official. To give you my name, if you want it. But only if it's something you want too." She looked from Monteville to Lorene, unsure. "Would that mean she's not my mom anymore?" she asked in a small voice. "No," Lorene said quickly, moving to her side. "I'll always be your mom. That won't change. But this would make things safer for you, more secure. It means you'll be part of his family. Legally. Forever." Monteville added, "It would mean you'd have every right to this home, to everything I've built, and to me. Not just as someone in your life, but as your father." Edlin looked down at her shoes. But I already call you Dad, sometimes." His voice cracked. "And every time you do, it means the world to me." She hesitated. Then, "Can I still be Edlin?" Monteville smiled. "You'll always be Edlin. But if you wanted, you could be Edlin Harlow." There was a long pause. Then, Edlin stepped forward and hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Okay," she whispered. "I want that." Monteville held her close, and for the first time in his life, tears ran freely down his face, not from grief, but from joy. Across the room, Lorene turned away slightly, wiping her own eyes, a bittersweet smile forming on her lips. In the days that followed, preparations were made. Monteville's lawyers drew up papers, the judge fast-tracked the process due to special circumstances, and the household buzzed with nervous energy. On the morning of the adoption ceremony, Edlin wore a simple white dress that had once belonged to her mother, Lydia. Vivian had altered it to fit her perfectly. Monteville wore a gray tailored suit, the same one he had worn the day he married Lydia. Lorene stood beside them, not as an outsider, but as the bridge that had brought them back together. In the courthouse chamber, under high wooden ceilings and in front of a small crowd of staff and friends, Monteville knelt beside Edlin as the judge finalized the order. "With this document," the judge said, "Edlin Rosalind Miles becomes Edlin Rosalind Harlow, daughter of Monteville Harlow." Edlin looked up at Monteville, her eyes glowing. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. And he, through a tight smile and trembling lips, whispered back, "Hi, my girl." And just like that, what had been broken for a decade began to heal. Not through vengeance, not through justice, but through love and the choice to begin again. Summer came to Maple Creek in full bloom, and with it came a transformation that was more than seasonal. It was emotional, permanent, and quietly profound. The mansion, once a monument to loss, now pulsed with life. Open windows let in birdsong. Doors no longer creaked from disuse, but from being constantly opened by curious footsteps. The staff, once solemn and discreet, now smiled freely, their routines infused with warmth. The heart of the house beat again, and it beat in the rhythm of a 10-year-old girl's laughter. Edlin Harlow, once a hungry girl who had knocked on a stranger's door, was now the beloved daughter of a man she'd unknowingly carried the blood of all her life. She had her own room, painted soft blue with gold stars on the ceiling, a piano by the window, a bookshelf packed with stories she used to only dream about. And more importantly, she had a father who now tucked her in at night, who learned how to braid her hair, poorly but with effort, who showed up to every school recital, eyes glistening, hands never empty of flowers. Lorene still lived in the mansion too, but the relationship between her and Monteville had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Not romance, not quite, but a quiet alliance built from shared devotion, hard forgiveness, and the child who'd saved them both. Lorene eventually took charge of the estate's charity foundation, turning Monteville's unused fortune into programs for single mothers, shelters, and community schools, something that had become her calling, not penance. One hot afternoon, the three of them sat together under the shade of an ancient oak tree in the estate's back garden. Edlin sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket, licking peach juice from her fingers, while flipping through a scrapbook that Vivian had helped her make. Monteville was lying on his side, propped up on one elbow, watching her with quiet amazement. "You've filled that entire thing already?" "I had a lot to put in it," she said proudly. "Pictures from the adoption, my piano certificate, the pony's first haircut, Mom's charity event, my first snowman." She looked up with a cheeky grin. You crying at my school play?" "I was not crying," Monteville said, mock offended. Lorene chuckled. "You absolutely were." He laughed softly, then reached over and plucked a peach from the basket. "Can't a man be moved by great art?" Edlin closed the scrapbook and sat up straight. "Do you know what I'm going to put in next?" "What?" Monteville asked. "A picture of us planting a tree." He raised a brow. "A tree?" "Yep," she said. "Right here. Something new. Something ours." They all looked around. The estate was full of trees, many of them older than the mansion itself. But this, she explained, would be their tree, a symbol of everything that had grown from loss. Monteville smiled and nodded. "We'll do it tomorrow." And so, the next morning, they did. Together, they dug a small patch near the garden's edge. They planted a young magnolia tree, its leaves small, its trunk thin, but its roots eager. Monteville tied a satin ribbon around the base. Lorene pressed her hand into the soil. Edlin whispered something to the seedling as if giving it a secret blessing. Years would pass, and the tree would grow tall, strong, and wild with blossoms each spring. It would become a place where future birthdays were celebrated, where books were read under its shade, where laughter echoed on summer afternoons. But for now, it was a promise that the past would not define them, a promise that love, though late, though flawed, could still arrive and stay, and a promise that even from ash, something beautiful could bloom. In my view, the ending of this story is not just a resolution, it is a quiet triumph of the human spirit. It shows that healing is rarely loud or dramatic. Sometimes it happens in shared breakfasts, in awkward piano lessons, in the planting of a tree. What moved me most was how none of the characters were perfect. Each was broken in their own way. Lorene carried guilt, Monteville carried grief, and Edlin carried questions no child should ever have to ask. But in coming together, they chose love over blame, presence over punishment, and hope over history. That choice, repeated day after day, rebuilt what once seemed irreparably lost. The story reminds us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the courage to forgive and the willingness to begin again, even after a decade of silence. And sometimes, when a little girl knocks on a door, asking only for bread, she opens a door in someone else's soul that had long been shut. That is the miracle.